Morning, Mr. Legess. Good morning, sir. Good morning to all. And let's call the Finance Committee meeting of September the 26th to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Vickery.
Present.
Mr. Washington.
Present.
Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Hess.
Present.
Mr. Mulcahy.
Present.
Mr. Seroy.
Present.
Mr. Hildebrand. Mr. Einfeld. Ms. Weber. Mr. Payton.
Present.
Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Zenz.
Present.
Mr. Wheeler. Mr. Lear. We have a quorum.
Thank you. I've received no request for public comment. I have no presentations. The only minutes that you've been forwarded are the June 27th, 2018, and I'll need a motion to approve those minutes. Ms. Dunbar with a motion. Ms. Weber with a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like same. Motion carries. Treasurer's Office, Mr. Africano, and I'll need a motion to combine and approve the County Treasurer's Report, the County Collector's Report, and the monthly resolution. Mr. Washington with a motion, Mr. Payton with a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like same. Motion carries. Good morning.
Good morning. I don't have a lot to report today. Third distribution has been made. Fourth distribution is coming up around October 8th. We held the tax auction, surplus auction, on the 16th, and we raised approximately $830,000. Anecdotally, the $750 opening bid didn't seem to change anything, so that's a positive. Actually didn't hear anything. I guess the most important thing is taxes are going to be published in the paper around the 15th of October, and we're preparing for the tax sale. Other than that, I don't think we have anything else.
Any questions? Any questions? You've looked at the reports and we've passed them?
Yeah, one last thing actually on those reports. I think we're at about near $200,000 in interest so far this year, which is over double of what we raised last year in revenue on tax revenue that we were able to invest.
Chairman Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to commend you, Nick, for making those decisions on moving that money to the place where it maximized the interest potential for the county and thus the taxpayers. It's great work.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments? All right. Thank you, Nick. Steve McCarty, Finance Department.
I can cut his budget by that amount.
What's making it? You take it.
No good deed goes unnoticed.
That's right.
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
He's waving at me about something. Okay. Morning.
Good morning. I believe all of you have received the mounds of paper that we're covering today. I do have to make just a comment. I don't remember the last time when we were going to cover a budget in the last few years that there's been laughter in this room before the meeting, so that's a good thing. So, let me get organized too. The first set we'll go through, I won't spend a lot of time on the normal distribution, sales tax, income tax, use tax, the inmate Ben Rettle report, etc. I will note, as you probably may have seen, that it was a real nice sales tax number that we received in September. And it was a combination, as page 2 identifies, of both our 0.25% and our 1% out in the unincorporated area. So a nice trend happening there. Few tidbits of information that we'll cover today that we received at last week's IGFOA conference. The state confirmed that income tax, they're seeing income tax on the rise, and so it kind of confirmed the report and the trend that we're seeing. So there was that is a good thing. So so I won't spend a lot of time, like I said, but if anybody's got any questions, please. I know we're covering a lot of ground today. So
Any questions on the sales tax? Hearing none, we'll move on to bed rental. Any questions on bed rental? Oh, Mr. Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume that the receipt report for August is because of some timing issue, because it was noticeably down. Only about
which one?
590,000.
Which
We've been
report?
averaging almost $1 million.
Which report?
Bed rental?
I'm sorry, that's cash flow,
Oh, you're on cash.
where it's
Oh, okay.
cash flow where it's talking about bed rental.
Okay, yeah, we'll move the cash flow. Yes, I highlighted that. The cash flow report is a timing of when the payments arrive. So I highlighted it, and one of the payments, $400,000 payment, showed up early September. So I adjusted the average in September, and just to identify that, you know, it's per the report, that the initial report, but the timing for the cash report is when it actually hits the bank. So as you see that, we've seen a few of those trends along the way, and right now, you know, 400,000 can really make a difference, you know what I mean, on that trend. So I highlighted just to make sure, just keep that in mind as we go forward. That can happen, but it's still accounted for.
Any other questions? Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Chairman Wheeler.
Thank you. More of a comment than a question if the committee would look at, let's just say July of 18, June, July of 18 versus June, July of 17, and the way that runs out as far as our ending cash balance. You'll start to see some things that haven't happened in quite a long time. And it's a clear indication of where we're going. So, and this is cash stuff. This is not just fund balances. So I just thought I'd draw that to the committee's attention.
Any other questions or comments? Moving on,
Okay.
Steve.
So that's all for the updates. The next two both have public display requirements. The levy has a 20-day and the budget has a 15-day. So the plan is, for regular meeting wise, is today's meeting and then the November full board, so that we cover that. These will go on the website for that public display time frame, which will obviously more than cover that time frame. For the budget, if we run into any updates, changes, if some departments have been really busy, may still be working on a few things. We'll discuss that at the October finance meeting. But this lays out the groundwork. This also lays out is for the next tax anticipation warrant, which is yet to be determined the amount and the details of that, but that is lien against this levy. So this is the first process to get in place for that. Now, as far as the details of this, worked close with Eric down in the assessor's office. Appreciate all the information that he provided when it became available. We are looking approximately as a total increase of around 3% to 3.1. Our cap only allows us to collect a certain amount. So historically, we've gone a few tenths percentage higher in case, when this process finishes up in the springtime, if it, happens to change as an increase in our favor, that we have requested, enough to capture any additional changes that may happen in our favor. So, we have also adjusted liability insurance, which goes to our tort fund, down to reallocate to other areas, as you can see by the percentages. Because of the changes in insurance and some of the operational side of that, that fund, and the detail is in the budget document, that fund, we can lower that request, for the levy and be able to potentially use it in other places. So that's what's depicted here. Chairman Wheeler, if you have any other comments that you want to make on this.
Just
Chairman Wheeler.
just basic stuff. We, people know we're tax capped, and that's one of the reasons you have to shuffle this around on a yearly basis, and you have to try to capture as much as you can, new construction, CPI, whatever. Steve put a lot of work into this, and I just wanted to emphasize that years ago, when the VAC had a large surplus and the county was in a much worse situation than we're in, we reduced that levy. And I'd say over the last, probably since 2012, I think we've increased the allocation for that we're providing to VAC and our veterans by $100,000, and I believe 40 grand in the last 2 years. I left those numbers up on my desk. I apologize, but that's the largest part of our increase on the levy is for the VAC, because we're honoring that commitment to allocate them more money and get them back to where they need to be in the future. So I just wanted to mention that. That's what we're doing here. And
It's
why
about
that-
19,000, I think.
Correct, but we've done that for a couple of years in a row. We've really
Right.
escalated that over the last 2 years, and we're going to continue to do that until they get up towards, that 250, 260 range, which is what they are typically were spending, but they were using that large surplus they had in there over there to spend that down, because it was a lot of unnecessary revenue. So they partnered with us when times were bad back in 12 and 13, and now we're getting that money back to them, but we can't do it all at once because of tax caps. I want to make sure everybody knows that. So, but beyond everything else, what Steve said about liability insurance was accurate. We've made some good choices there. And the money we're saving is better allocated elsewhere instead of just building up that fund. So,
Well, we're discussing the tax levy, so I'll need a motion and a second. Mr. Legess with a motion, Mr. Seroy's with a second, and this requires a roll call. And
See if there's any other questions.
pardon?
Any other questions?
you have any other questions? Okay, roll call vote.
he doesn't get paid.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Vickery.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Hess. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Seroy. Ms. Weber. Mr. Payton. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Zenz. Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
Let's move on to the approval of the 19 tentative budget. You have a copy in your packet. To get into discussion, let's get a motion and a second. Mr. Seroy's with a motion. Mr. Zenz with a second. Any discussion? Any questions for Steve or Andy on this?
I can give some highlights here.
Okay,
some of
very
the,
good.
Yeah, information here. There's a lot of information here, obviously. The total appropriation across all funds is $71.4 million. We are missing the 911 fund that does go through their board first, and then it becomes part of our entire package as an umbrella. With that, of being the $75 million range once we have it as far as total appropriation. Some of the interesting items, another interesting item that I want to share with the committee, S&P was at the conference as well last week, and they were talking about one of the hot topics right now around the state is public safety pensions, or pensions in general, but especially public safety. And the average funding around the state is a interesting number, and it's at 51% is the average. So I want to report to you as of December 31st, 2017, our SLEP, which is our public safety with IMRF, is 88% funded, and our regular is 92, almost 92.5 funded. The one that needs a little bit of work that we have is the smallest of it's our eco plan. We're at rounded up to about 45%. So that's our smallest. That's a unique situation in that fund. But as the pension fund continues to get stronger in our local fund balance, you know, then maybe we can look at options here down the road to potentially strengthen, you know, the position of that. So their recommendation, S&P's, was 90% funding by 2040. So, you know, we're in good shape when it comes, you know, to our major pension funding, which is, you know, one of the topics that continued on from that was, you know, that some are looking at like pension bonds, like doing bonds to a certain dollar amount then to fund to get their percentage up to save, but then you get in to the amount you pay versus the amount you can earn, arbitrage situations. That's a very interesting topic. So that was a good discussion, but that's good information that I wanted to share with you. So you know, as we look at the fund balances, one of the first reports we have, you know, is the fund balance trends there with the general fund, tort, and pension. You know, you can see, you know, the positive trend that, you know, is continuing from where we were just a few years ago. So we're moving in the right direction, and we continue to move in the right direction. So that's you know, kind of a summary. Please stop me, you know, if you guys had something. You know, we had the general fund summary, you know, from the $4.8 million, almost $4.9 million deficit, to, you know, potentially being around $400,000 to $500,000 deficit this year, and then being out of the hole next year, possibly a positive $623,000 fund balance. You know, that's a significant change, you know, over a $5 million, nearly a $6 million shift in 3 years. So that's mind-boggling, actually, from, you know, and what we've been through. So so it's all positive trend, you know, and you know, it took a lot of time. I appreciate the communication and we had a lot of good communication and good discussion. One of the unique things to make sure we trended correctly was the sale of the River Valley Juvenile Detention Center and our new IGA with Will County, and we since figured out the impact to that on as far as a fund level to the general fund will be about 2.2 million of the 5.5. And you say, well, that sounds a little low. Well, we're getting into the higher counting stuff, so I'm not gonna roll your eyes back with that information, but but the benefit is, and if you take a step back and really look at the overall benefit of that and the cash flow benefit of that, is we have not written a check to them as far as this whole agreement. We have not written a check since the middle of 2016, and we will not write a check for those services until sometime in 2022. So it may not all show up, you know, in a document like this, but that's significant in overall cash flow and overall process. So so what we have built in is what will show up, trying to match that up, and we have it going forward. So while we're on that subject, if you want to look at it now, if you just want to write some notes on page 3 of the revenue. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Before we get moving on to the next thing, I want to clarify something. ECO, a lot of the board members know what that is. That was a retirement or pension plan that was open for a short window, maybe a year or two. I can't remember the exact amount, but then it closed. And so when those people retired, there's nobody paying into that system. That's why it's funded at 45%. It's not like we haven't lived up to our obligations. It was a system that existed for a very short period of time that was a very, very rich benefit. And so when those people retire, there's nobody paying into it anymore. So we will have to address it down the road. But being that low level, I can't think of anybody who would be close to being funded in that eco program anywhere, unless they've just got money falling out of their pockets. I don't see how it's possible. So, and then the other thing on the general fund summary, just realize for the committee's sake, that we have a $3 million surplus this year. And that's not all Will County. A lot of it has to do with revenue that's coming in from DHS, marshals, et cetera. And then every department controlling costs. It's key that this has been a group effort. It's not just one area or anything. It's really the convergence in this year from some things that we've been working on for a while.
And $1 million from the Will County cash, the one-time cash payout of that.
Thank you. That's all I had to wrap up that previous stuff.
Oh, Mr. Legess.
I think we'd be remiss too if we didn't include the cooperation we got from our union partners in the length of contracts and also with non-retro pay and things like that really, really helped us out. And of course, the elected officials and the department heads and the job they did with their budget. So, I mean, it's phenomenal when you look at it. It really is. Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Kinzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As one of the newer board members, I can't take credit for a lot of what's happened because I've only been here less than a year. But certainly this board needs credit for holding the line. The department heads need credit. The employees of the county need credit, and all the decision makers. And I like to compliment you. I'm probably the most qualified to do it because I probably had the least involved in getting this accomplished. Thank you.
We need a vote on this.
Well,
You got any questions?
yeah, how much
This point?
highlights you want me to hit? You know, after what I struggle with is going through so much detail for so long and then trying to summarize it and try to keep a right balance for the committee members.
What are those numbers on that pension thing again? I'm just interested in that, to highlight that. I didn't make notes while you were talking about it. We're funded at
88%
88%.
for SLEP, public safety, and 92.5 for regular, and 44.5 for the other.
That question came up the other day. Someone asked me about that, and I knew we were funded in a good position, but I couldn't remember the percentages. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think capital development might be something to at least gloss over a little bit so people can see what we've done with the squad purchases and other things and how that's funded throughout the next few years. We pushed a lot into there, not saying that was the wrong thing to do, but people should know what our commitments are, you know, to keep economical decisions, you know, based on vehicles and other things, but it kind of, we're limited on what more we can put in there going forward and still be able to pay off the more debt that we need to. So I want to at least, maybe if anybody
Sure.
had any questions about that, but note that page.
Capital development is right after the second page of the general fund expense, the detail of the capital development. So, yeah, what Mr. Wheeler's talking about in this squad lease 2017, for this current year, we split that between general fund and a special fund with the cooperation of the Sheriff's Department. And then the entire payment and the remainder will be in 19 and 20. And then we're working on a new lease, squad lease, that the payments appear to, you know, look like they'll start in FY19 and it'll be a 3-year. So you can see with the vans that we did in 2017, they'll be finishing up in 2019, and then we started another lease in early 2018. That'll be moving forward. The other item besides the leases is the office equipment line. There's a couple of things unique in there for 2019 that we're running into. We upgrade to, I believe, Eric Blair's talked about DevNet and the renewal of that in the other committees. We also have, along with that, is a $10,000 server upgrade that needs to be done to stay in compliance. One time, we also have some upgrades in IT going on. Kevin, I believe, talked about it yesterday for office suite upgrades. And then I plugged in 15,000, as we'll discuss here in a little bit. We do have some aging copiers showing up. Like mine was from 2008. You know, there are a few left from that era that are starting to show their age and starting to act up. So we've plugged some in to try to take care of that. So a lot of that is, you know, kind of one-time things. So those are a number of the items, you know, in there, along with normal things that we've always had there to absorb. So. So, yeah, I don't know if anybody had any other questions, general fund wise. If we want to stop there before we go, you want to do this document as a total, right? As a whole. Okay, so we'll just
31.
If there was any, do it all together. Yeah.
The whole, yeah, whole budget. Okay. We have a motion and a second on the approval of the 19 tentative budget, right? Yeah.
Why don't we, yeah, just because they're major funds, in the special fund section, right after the bond funds, tort and pension, I just want to make sure everybody, you know, takes a look. Those are our other major funds, are also part of the levy. I think it would be, you know, the other funds, I think you can tell what they're for and, you know, look at them on their own that the various departments use. So even though we've lowered, like in the tort fund, which is Fund 200, we've lowered the levy, you can still see that there's ample operating, you know, still there for various things, and then you can see that, you know, pension fund is 210. Those two are together. So from translating, you will see that these property tax numbers are slightly lower than the request, but that's because of making sure we go a little bit beyond it for the request to be able to capture. So that's, you'll see a little bit of difference there. But since they're major funds and levied funds, just want to make sure that, you know, we brought those to your attention. You know, and very back you have debt service schedules, the lease payment schedules. You also have, you know, there's VAC, animal control, health, highway. You know, the only thing missing at this point, as I mentioned, is 911. So a lot of, as far as referencing there, you've got, you know, other additional information available. So, and if you ever have any questions, feel free to contact me. We can also bring up, you know, questions, and or if department head gets back to us and, you know, they need an update to something, we'll bring those back next month before it's finalized in November at the full board. So else anybody's got any questions? That's, I think, as far as the
Ms.
highlights.
Just wondered on health insurance for under the expense budget, if that's a pretty good number, comfortable
We have
number?
4.9 built into that number. So so that was what we were what the max, potential max. It could be less than that. So we've put the max in there at this point that we're aware of.
Yeah, Chairman Wheeler.
Thank you. That to answer that completely, 4.9 was the max, but we are negotiating right now. We've already gotten bids from other companies, you know, so it's not like we haven't looked at the market, but as far as negotiating, and nothing was close. So we're looking at what the current option or the current plans that we have, negotiating that down, looking at our ancillary insurances to try to leverage that. So we should have a complete answer by the next finance committee. So that's why that number's where it is now. We're still working on it, I guess.
Okay. Time for a motion? Second.
I don't know if there's any other questions.
We have a motion and a second, okay. We're gonna have a roll call vote, and it's a $31 million, is that it?
No, the whole thing is 71.4.
71.4, okay. So we're approving a 71.4 total budget for all departments, and we have a
All
motion.
funds.
All funds, I'm sorry. So we have a motion and a second, it'll be a roll call vote.
Mr. Lajes? Aye. Mr. Vickery?
Aye.
Mr. Washington? Aye. Mr. Hess? Aye. Mr. Mulcahy? Aye. Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Aye. Mr. Payton? Aye. Ms. Dunbar? Aye. Mr. Kinzinger? Aye. Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Let's go to our next thing is, discussion on copiers.
Yeah,
Oh, Mr. Leggett.
this, yeah.
I wanted to point out something, and I hope I'm correct on this. When I look at, the corrections, budget, it shows the revenue at, 10,500,000. And if you flip over to the expenses, it looks like it's out of whack because it says corrections expenses is 11,500,000. But I believe if you dig further into that, that includes, and I'm sure Sheriff can attest to this, that expenses includes all that we pay for our own in-county prisoners. Is that correct? That's
Local
correct,
as well.
Mike?
Yep.
Yeah, so you're talking about $4 million there? Yeah, so it looks like it's out of whack when it really isn't, because we're taking our cost of our own county inmates out of there, so it's like $4 million, so that's a good thing.
Any other comments? Okay, we're into, bid discussion.
Yeah. Do you want to start on this?
I'll start this one off.
Chairman Wheeler.
Thank you. I asked Steve to put this on because at one point we just had to request for a copier from, and it's kind of in a hurry for corrections. They have a lot of paperwork they need to process, and theirs is, as Steve mentioned, on its last leg. But then we had requests come in, the coroner's copier died and the recorder is both limping along. So I think it's time to put these machines and also the maintenance contract out to bid for all of our equipment. Now, the contract is up on the middle of January in 19, so we could not act on that as this board, but we can have the bid in, and then the new board can act on it. So I thought, while we're doing these 3 machines, get quotes from all these different companies that may want to compete for our business, and then also bid the maintenance on that as well. Just not act on that part of it until next year, because a new board, has to make that decision. So that was my only suggestion, and we have to do it kind of with a hurry to get things moving, because these departments can't be without copiers. So if anybody had any thoughts, suggestions, alterations, anything there.
I got something for that.
Yes.
Ask the guys.
Mr.
So are we gonna include every copier in the county? Everybody's copier?
Well,
I mean,
if
for
they
the
don't need,
maintenance part?
for the maintenance part, yes, that's part of the contract.
Yeah.
Because there's a big sheet of all the copiers that they would maintain. One of the things I was concerned with, and I was struggling to find the contract because nobody seemed to have it in the county offices. The previous auditor had it, the current one didn't. But what are the terms in the agreement of the maintenance? Well, they only work on copiers that they supplied. And I couldn't find that in the language of the current agreement. So that's one of the things we'll look at as far as a qualified bidder. Somebody may get the printers or the copiers, but another person may get the maintenance contract. We just need to make sure that they'll work on another company's copier. Does that make sense?
That's what I was
Yeah,
hoping that the
yeah.
answer was. Okay.
As far as the rest of them, it's January of, 2019, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 3, I believe this is 3 years.
This is a 3-year.
Before the agreement actually goes up for the rest of them. So that's where we're getting into, bidding, we might, each copier may have to have its own maintenance go with it on the new, you know, because they have a right. What I found is they have a right to either accept or reject if we bring in new equipment onto this maintenance, you know, so that's what we may run into.
Mr. Duval.
18. Yeah, Kevin? Mr. Duval?
When you do, okay, when you do go out to bid for the copiers, because I believe that was the intention initially, and I think it got off of that, you do need to take in consideration that it's a heavy franchise industry, so only certain people are licensed to deal with certain type of copiers in the area. So, is that making sense how I'm saying that? So if you have Canon copiers, you need to make sure you have a Canon person to server if you're at Xerox. So when you do the bids, make sure you take that into account, because to make sure you don't void warranties and stuff, licensed people should only be working on those things, or you've kind of broken that, and you want to make sure your contract has some teeth. I think we've got a mixture, and I don't know how much that applies once you have older copiers, so that might apply less, but I just want to make that important that you take in consideration when they apply, that you want to make sure that they have whatever the necessary documents that allows them to properly work on that company's devices.
Should we include that in the bid package?
I was just gonna suggest, Mr. Chairman, it's your recommendation that we let our IT director have input on how we put this bid out. I think it probably makes a lot of sense. He's got the history, and as does Steve. But that was my only concern, to make sure all those things meet, and then also that these departments get a copier as soon as they possibly. We can't have them wait for 4 months while we figure this out.
Right.
You know, so we got to kind of move on it.
Do you want to move forward with a bid and advertise, or at this point, what do you?
Right. I'd say
What action do we need to take today?
I'll make the motion that we bid out these 3 copiers and the maintenance contract sufficient to the needs as prescribed by the IT director and in conjunction with the finance director, because they have the history here with the copiers.
You've heard that as a motion, Mr. Mulcahy.
I just want to make a comment.
He's got to go on.
Oh,
15.
Get a second.
Oh, okay.
and you got a second? Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that Kevin would be in with the specs for the bids, because they all have to work together, all the machines have to speak the same language, more or less, so, you know, we need to be sure that they're gonna be compatible with the software and the operating systems.
Yep.
We have a motion and a second. Oh, and yes, once again, 18.
The one thing I would also add is, while we fix and 100% maintain all of the printers, there's especially with the copiers, and we can't even buy, my department can't even purchase the parts and stuff like that. And even if we could, you wouldn't want us working on them. You need somebody that does this all the time, because we do more harm than good on something like. But on the printers, we handle that. We've been doing that for years. We got that down. So.
Very good. We just need a voice vote on this. For the bid, we just need a voice vote.
To start the process. Yeah.
That's all. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like same. Motion carries. Pardon? George Washington. Next on your agenda.
I have no claims this month to discuss, so we had it on there just in case we had any, and we do not have any. So.
I believe we do. We have a claims.
Well, there's one that's
Oh, you have,
it's not recommended for approval. It requires the approval of the committee,
Okay.
so we can. Trying to.
What's
This
the
is-
action
This is the
required?
first time the auditor sent his claims to this committee for approval, since his employee can't approve his claim per se.
I guess.
So he sent it here, which is actually appreciated and should happen, but where to insert it on the agenda? When we approve claims, it's not specifically listed on the agenda. Well, it says claims not recommended for approval. If it said claims recommended for approval, see what I mean? Unless we make a motion to not approve and then that's overridden by the vote. I don't know, I'm trying to think of a way to get this done.
In your packet is a claim, and we need to approve that claim or not approve that claim. You each have a copy of it, so I'll entertain a motion to pay the claim. Ms. Dunbar and Ms. Payton, or Mr. Payton. So, and now this is spending money, so we'll need a roll call vote. Oh, or discussion, yes,
Could
Mr.
I just ask a
Sirois.
question? This is mileage, I'm just looking at the claim, it's mileage from a conference, mileage reimbursement from a conference.
That's what's stated on the,
I just wanna make sure that's
Yep.
what we're approving.
mhm.
Okay.
Any other discussion on the matter? Hearing none, roll call vote.
Yes.
Mr. Largess. Mr. Vickery.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mr. Mulcahy.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Ms. Weber. Mr. Payton. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Zenz.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Very good.
Just as in the future, maybe we put, claims recommended / not recommended for approval.
I didn't draw up I didn't draw up the agenda,
Yeah,
so.
I didn't realize we had, yeah, another one, so we can work on that. That's all I had, unless there's any other questions.
Have you got any
I'm
questions for
done.
Steve at this point? Mr. Chairman.
I wanted to thank Steve. One of the things that I asked him was we didn't want special meetings. We didn't want to have special meetings after special meetings to approve the budget. It's a couple grand each meeting cost plus, and we've always run up against the wire. So he's put in a lot of nights and weekends to get this ready for this point and still get the other stuff done in his office that he has to. And I really appreciate the extra effort. It's been stressful, but hopefully next year we'll be in a better cycle on that end. So thank you.
I got one too. And this might be for Steve. Did the department head meetings on Fridays, does that help you prepare your budget going forward? You're on just hearing all that
Well,
feedback?
yeah, we communicate out with them and get their input, you know, and anything unique. They sit down, you know, sit down with Chairman Wheeler, you know, Anita Speckman, myself, combination. We send out worksheets for all their special funds to assist them in getting the newest budget done. So yeah, there's a lot of communication and the unique things did get communicated back, you know what I mean, to be able to be captured. So that's with everybody's schedule, it wasn't just mine. Everybody's busy and trying to, you know, sometimes you feel like you're pulling their teeth, you know what I mean, to get them to hurry up and get your stuff done so we can meet the time frame. But everybody, you know, there may be a few that, you know, may have realized something or, you know, that we may discuss in October, but for the most part, yeah, I think we got everything, so.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that.
Any other questions, comments?
All right.
Thanks,
All right,
Steve.
thank you.
Sheriff Downey. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. I don't really have a whole lot as far as an update other than the redundancy of repeating myself from last month that things are still consistent with our housing. So if there's any questions about that, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions for the sheriff on income, expense? Mr. Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff, this doesn't deal with housing, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of catching off guard. But I participate in the Kankakee County Renewed Opportunity Organization, and it's my understanding that they just secured a 4-year, $2 million grant. Have you had a chance to mention that to either criminal justice or this group?
We have not.
Maybe
That
an
happened.
update to them would
I
be
think we're
appropriate
still
for the next
working
item.
out some of the financials because the issue, I mean, it's a good issue. It's a good issue to have because I think it's going to be very helpful. But you know, the biggest issue that we're still trying to work out is what that grant is going to end up costing some departments. So until we get that far, I don't really have anything that I can share with you at this point, although we are working through it.
All right.
And again, doing, you know, what's right for the people who need the services. I mean, that's obviously the important part of that grant. But again, with that grant, there are some expenses incurred, going to be incurred by departments other than us as well. So
Okay, so when you have that worked out, you'll be able to give a report. to the
we
committee?
should probably have some information for criminal justice.
Thank you.
Was that the 10th, I think?
Oh, Ms. Weber?
Just compliments today. I appreciate your being a baseball coach and helping young people. That's just a wonderful thing for county reflection and yourself and the community. And also appreciate with our accidents at Route 115 Lehigh Road, you're meeting with officials from Herscher and others to help try to get that straightened out.
We had a great meeting on Monday regarding that intersection at Lehigh Road, which is 7,000 and 115. Representative Parkhurst, the Illinois State Police, and I know I'm going to forget somebody, fire department from Herscher,
And village president, village
the
chief.
mayor of Herscher, and also relatives of victims of that intersection.
3 different families.
Yes, yes, and it was a very good meeting, and the credit really goes to Mark Rogers and his staff, because working through the Illinois Department of Transportation, I'm sure he has his fill of that. Any state organization we've all dealt with, and the day after that meeting, one of the things we talked about was done.
It was done.
So you know, that's a credit to Mark and his staff. And yeah, it was a really good meeting and very productive. And you know, the goal is to eliminate the accidents at that intersection, and we're working towards that.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Chairman Wheeler.
Thank you. This is just to kind of to add on what the sheriff said about the grant. It's a $400,000 grant over 5 years, and that's it. I didn't want Mr. Lear to think that we're not working on this, but there's a lot of departmental coordination that has to happen from public defender, state's attorney, courts, us. It's a drug court grant, so we have to make sure that the infrastructure is set up properly to take advantage of that, because it's a great opportunity, but does have its challenges at the same time. And we don't want to disrupt the good work that drug court's already doing in order to move this thing forward. So it had to be methodical as we work through this thing, and then to make sure we're doing things in line with the grant, or that the grant needs to be what it needs to be. So that was really just we didn't have anything to report until we had something to report, if you will.
The one of the issues is on grants is when they sunset, what ramifications are we left with? Okay, we went through that many times, and so in fact we used to have a grant sunset report. Yeah,
that's
hey,
right.
what grants are going to sunset this year? Okay, because then we have to adjust personnel because we've hired people or whatever. I remember we did that in Pembroke.
Mhm.
We had a-
Well, and I think in addition to that, and what you're saying is right, but I think the advantage with this grant is that it is renewable year by year.
Okay.
So they're telling us it's 4 or 5 years, but if we're not doing what we're supposed to do, or I say if things aren't getting done the way it's supposed to be, it may not get renewed. So it could be, you know, something that we deal with right away, as opposed to stringing it out, and maybe even after the 5 years, it may be even renewable after that, but we'll have to wait and see.
And sometimes we end up spending money out front and not getting our money for about 6 months. We've run into several departments like that.
Yes,
So.
correct.
That's
all I got.
Is that it, Coach?
Stop. That was, you know.
I was going to mention that, Carol, because
Well.
we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize that. Okay, it's a fine job.
It
out
was,
there.
you know what, it was, the kids are awesome out there. It was great. Well, right now, I feel like the Cubs, because we were 0-4, so I'm kind of feeling like the Cubs right now. Or the Sox.
Auditor Jake Lee. Do we have claims here? Okay. You were notified electronically about our claims, and so I'll need a motion. Ms. Dunbar with a motion, Mr. Payton with a second, and we'll need a roll call vote.
Mr. Lejes? Mr. Vickery?
Aye.
Mr. Washington? Mr. Hess? Mr. Mulcahy? Mr. Seroy? Ms. Weber? Mr. Payton? Ms. Dunbar? Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz? Mr. Wheeler? Motion carries.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Really don't have anything out of the ordinary, so if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to address them.
I've got to get my printer so that I don't print all 121 pages.
Yeah. Yeah.
So after about 10 pages this morning, I had to hit the kill button, and when I get home, I'll find out what's left.
Yeah.
Okay, but
There
I
you
did
go.
get to read the first 3 pages.
Oh, well, that's good. That's
Okay.
good.
But I should have got up at 5 if I was going to read the whole thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Where are we at on this? Any questions? Any questions on the claims report? Okay.
Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'll have you introduce the Delta Dental.
All right. Basically, this is our dental renewal, small percentage increase. It's obviously voluntary, 3.5% increase. That's our current summary. Really, it was just to get it in here to vote on. We were able to include it in the budget based on who participated previously, so we don't see any migration from that. So it's a complete pass-through. Pretty basic. They have a couple of plan choices.
Any questions? Let me get a motion in a second. Mike Mulcahy with a motion, Mr. Washington with a second. We'll do a roll call vote. Any discussion? Ms. Weber?
What kind of participation do the employees do?
You know, I wished I had those numbers in front of me, because it was completely voluntary and the county had no payment in it. I didn't bring it with me.
It's just a good plan. We have it
It's an
enough.
average of 387 enrolled.
Anita, do you have any input on that?
It says average of 387.
Yeah. 378, right?
378.
Just generally, I would say I see probably about 80% enrollment of like the people that take, our employees that take health, and that's just anecdotal. So I don't have, but that's about what I see is about 80%. And just a point of clarification, Andy, do we not want to specify what we're looking is to renew this just through January 1st? It expires in the current plan in October. So we want to move that renewal date to January with our insurance plan because we're going to get a bid. Our broker is going to give us a bid from our group insurance that would include this ancillary line as well. So that's what we're doing is just, we want to renew just for 3 months to get it on the same renewal date as our group health, gives us a little more flexibility in going out for bids.
Thank you for that clarification. That's
Also
important.
leverage too, so we're able to
And
bundle things a little bit better. Forgot about that.
We need a roll call. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lejes? Mr. Vickery?
Aye.
Mr. Washington? Mr. Hess? Mr. Mulcahy? Mr. Seroy? Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton? Ms. Dunbar? Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Zenz? Mr. Wheeler? Motion carries.
It says on number 3, 378 enrollees, right here on the paper.
Oh, okay. I didn't read that whole thing, okay. Under old and new business, we have, a report from, Karen Smetansky at VAC, to let the board know that we have a vet court graduation on November 1st. In the courthouse at 2:30, room 300. We're graduating 2 veterans, and we're also celebrating our 5th anniversary as a vet treatment court. We would love everyone to celebrate the graduations and that anniversary with us. That's Karen sending us that note. All right, for Todd?
Sir, can you repeat the time? I want to let Mr. McConnell know that
Okay.
information. I know he likes to
November 1 at the courthouse at 2:30, room 300.
Thank you, sir.
That's been a real good program. Okay. Chairman, anything else to add? And don't anybody leave till you sign everything, okay? Is there any old business to come before this committee? Is there any old business to come before this committee? Is there any new business to come before this committee? If not, I would ask for an adjournment. Mr. Legess with a motion to adjourn, Mr. Mulcahy with a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, like same. This meeting is adjourned.